Alright guys, if I could get your attention before we start. Just a couple things. We do have a lovely guest from the Board of Elections here to help us out today. Just a couple things. If you didn't get a chance to sign in or fill out a visitor's form, please do so. If you've got a couple bucks, throw them in the donation jars. We would appreciate it. It helps us kind of pay for what we're doing. Feel free to grab yourself something to eat, and if you want to find out about how to get more involved, let us know, because we've got lots of avenues of action. For those of you that are thinking about campaigning, just a quick campaign calendar overview. So this is a real brief kind of breakdown of what you need to be doing. So July to September, you should begin campaign organizations, identify possible volunteers, donors, sign locations. You want to start right away. In the fall, by September, you're going to start passing petitions. In October, you're going to keep passing petitions, gathering 2 to 3 times what you need. And this will be your first exposure as a candidate to voters out in the field. And then November, December, the petitions will be filed with the clerk. The gentleman from the Board of Elections will have more information on that. And then January to March, you're going to be doing your campaign push for the primary nomination. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. When you first get started, July to September, you should consider throwing a fundraiser for friends and family, if nothing else. If you do have ties to political folks, elected officials, that would be the time to invite them out. And you want to have at least 2 to 3 fundraisers if possible, because you will need to be able to send out palm cards and potentially print palm cards and potentially send out mailers. So there's lots of things you need to get done ahead of time. But the first thing I would tell you to do at this point is to find your volunteers, find some donors, find places where you'll be able to put signs, and maybe start putting together ideas for your first fundraiser. I'm going to let Larry introduce our guest. If you have any other questions, you can talk to any one of the board members. We're happy to help.
All right, thanks, Nikki. So, as you guys know, we do the monthly candidate workshops, last Friday of every month. Last month was a viability workshop. Today we're going to be talking about financial disclosure. So how to set up your committee, which is the part of the campaign that can accept the money, that can spend the money. And we are welcoming today the Deputy Director of the Division of Disclosure, Mr. Andy Nauman from the State Board of Elections, and I'm just going to let him speak.
Thank you for having me. Good evening. I'm Andy Nauman with the Illinois State Board of Elections, and I'm here to talk to you about campaign disclosure. This isn't going to be the most fun topic. Most people will be ready to take a nap by the end of this. I will be going over a lot of general information. I will be giving you the main course in the meal. I won't be having a spread like this over here, and I won't be having a dessert. This is going to be the main course, and it's not the most pleasant thing at all times, so it's kind of bland in certain areas. I've prepared this presentation to help candidates, campaign workers, and committees, officers understand the general filing requirements under the Campaign Finance Act. I will cover basics of forming a political committee, and I will essentially be giving you the how to prepare your reports. The material will cover selecting committee officers, fundraising restrictions and requirements, required record keeping, when reports need to be filed, and how to complete the filings. One of your first considerations in establishing a political organization should be to select your chairman and treasurer. The same person, including the candidate, may occupy both these positions. The chairman is typically the spokesperson of the organization, and the treasurer is the person who is responsible for the campaign disclosure filings. The disclosure law requires committees to keep detailed records of their finances and then report receipts and expenditures on a regular basis. So although the committee treasurer does not need to be a CPA, it is critical to appoint someone that has the time and commitment to maintain detailed accounts, records, and receipts, and that will confirm information disclosed on official reports. Computer literacy is also a plus and may even be a requirement if you're required to file electronically. Each receipt and expenditure must be reported and kept for 2 years. Records must reflect contributions received and money spent by your committee. The treasurer has to maintain the full name and mailing address, dates, and amounts of anyone who gives the committee any amount. That's from penny one. So someone gives you a $5 contribution, you're supposed to have their name and mailing address. This is the same for any expenditures. If you go out, you at Office Depot, you buy a $3 box of pens, you're supposed to have a receipt for that, and you need to account for that, and you need to keep the records for that for 2 years. There is one exception to this rule for licensed raffles that are conducted by the committee. You don't have to have the complete name and mailing addresses for, say, your 50-50 drawing. But if someone does purchase more than $150 worth of raffle tickets, then you will have to have their name and mailing address, and you will have to identify that on your reports. Committees can be required to conduct an audit of their financial records, and at any time, and if any of you have been lucky enough to participate in an audit, you will know good record keeping is a must. Therefore, I recommend you carefully consider who is qualified to be your treasurer. This is not a position you want to give out to your friends if they're not going to do a good job. If you want to give out titles, make up a title. Give them any title. But if you want to make sure you have a qualified treasurer, someone who's going to have your back and make sure they're filing reports timely, because you can be assessed civil penalties for delinquently filing reports. Additionally, I recommend that the treasurer be given oversight of all campaign workers soliciting contributions to make sure the money collected is accounted for under the law. There are a few things to keep in mind on this point. Your treasurer should instruct your campaign workers that all funds collected must be turned over to his or her attention within 5 days, along with detailed records of the sources. Anonymous contributions are not allowed, neither are those made in the name of another person or in the name of someone else. And public funds may be used for political purposes, may not be used for political services, although some people would like to try to do that, and people have tried to do that, but you can't use public funds for political purposes. There are some other fundraising restrictions to keep in mind as well, starting with contribution limits. I believe I handed out brochures to everyone, so you have the contribution limits. On one side there's contribution limits, on the other side so the actual election cycles. Contributions to political committees are capped at specific levels during designated election cycles based on the contributor and the type of committee receiving a contribution. For most types of committees, an election cycle equals a calendar year. However, for candidate political committees, an election cycle depends on the office being sought by the candidate, supported by the committee. Another restriction is that contributions cannot be made, solicited, or offered or accepted on state property unless a portion of that state building is being rented or leased by a private person or an entity. State law also prohibits fundraising in Sangamon County on the date the General Assembly is in session. However, this ban only applies to constitutional officers, legislators, candidates for these offices, legislative caucus committees, or political committees acting on their behalves. During the course of your campaign, you will likely plan activities to help you raise funds. If the campaign solicits funds through literature or advertisements, the law requires that you have this blurb on here. A copy of a report filed with the State Board of Elections is or will be available on the board's official website, www.elections.il.gov, or for purchase from the State Board of Elections, Springfield, Illinois. This requirement only applies to fundraising solicitations for campaigns. Materials that are only emphasize campaign themes, candidate qualifications, opinions on issues, press releases, or vote for literature are excluded. This brings us to the next topic that many committees fail to comply with, an attribution of source on political communications. A political committee that makes an expenditure for any pamphlet, circular, handbill, internet or telephone communication, radio, television, or print advertisement, or other communication directed at the voters and mentioning the name of a candidate in the next upcoming election has to clearly identify itself within the communication as having paid for it. This applies to any committee paying for any part of the communication, including its preparation and its distribution. This requirement is often overlooked by political committees, and we receive many complaints regarding this. The complaints are basically the committee didn't have an attribution source on their mailers or their yard signs. So anytime you put anything out there and the committee's paying for it, and it has a candidate's name in it, make sure it identifies that the committee actually paid for that. A lot of people, the yard signs are a big one, and we get a lot of complaints on it. People don't realize, at the very, very bottom, a lot of them, there is that little blurb, paid for by Citizens for John Doe, but a lot of people just miss that, and we get a lot of complaints on that. There are also exceptions if the item in question is too small to contain the required disclosure. For instance, if you have a promotional pen, you don't have to have paid for by on there. The other exception is for telephone polling and for printed communications by members of the General Assembly if they are directed at constituents and done in connection with the governmental or public service functions of their office. So as you probably already noticed, there's a good deal to keep track of, but an effective treasurer, given direct oversight of your committee's finances, will allow your candidate more time to deal with the issues and the constituents. All right, you have selected your officers. Now it's time to choose where you're going to do your banking. The law doesn't allow you to commingle personal funds with campaign funds, so you have to have a separate, segregated account. I believe almost all finance institutions now do require that you get a tax identification number. That's pretty much all banks now. The IRS can be contacted for that. The number is 1-800-829-4933. If your financial institution doesn't require that, we do recommend that you get a non-interest bearing account. There can be tax implications if your committee receives interest. So that's something to keep into consideration, especially if you open up a separate bank account under your Social Security number, then you would possibly have to have tax implications on that. When your committee opens a checking account, you will be helping your committee treasurer, as he or she will be getting monthly statements to help you verify the committee's internal records, and you can also use bank records to provide proof of payment. For candidate-related committees, we also recommend that the candidate be a signatory on the account. That way, if your treasurer resigns or leaves or just leaves you kind of high and dry, the candidate still has access to the records. Now, you are set to go. But you still don't have to file disclosure reports until you've raised or spent $5,000 during any 12-month period to support or oppose a candidate or questions of public policy. Money raised includes cash donations from individuals, party organizations, committees, loans from banks, or candidates themselves. Goods and services, what we call in-kind contributions, are also counted towards the $5,000 threshold. In-kinds are you typically receive something of monetary value, but you didn't receive cash. If your committee is being formed to support or oppose public policy or a referendum question, the $5,000 threshold applies as well. And this is for all money raised or spent during any part of the actual process, even if the issue isn't on the ballot, and even if the petitions haven't been circulated as of yet. All committees also have to take into account any money spent or received on what is called electioneering communications. Simply put, electioneering communications is any broadcast, advertisement, or communication that calls on voters to vote for or against a clearly identified candidate, political party, or a question of public policy on the ballot in the 30 days before a primary election or within the 60 days before a general or consolidated election. Finally, when determining the $5,000 threshold has been reached, you will also have to account for independent expenditures. These represent spending by the committee or by the individual or committee to advocate for or against a public official or candidate or question of public policy, provided the spending is not made in coordination with the candidate or their committee. Once you go over the $5,000 threshold, you have established your date of creation as a political committee. You have 10 business days from your creation date to file the D1 statement of organization, unless it's within the 30-day window prior to the election. Then it has to be filed within 2 business days. It is important to file a statement of organization on time, because your committee will be fined if you don't, and the fine will grow for every business day that the report is late. Let's look at the D1 statement of organization. It is commonly called the D1. It includes 11 sections of information about the makeup and purpose of your committee. Before we get to the 11 sections, you will need to identify your committee by name and full mailing address. Depending on the type of committee you are forming, there may be some restrictions or requirements regarding the name you use. However, I'll go over those in a couple of minutes here. Where the address is concerned, we suggest that you use an address that sends mail directly to the treasurer. Committees that have used campaign headquarters or P.O. boxes have often found that enforcement notices have gone undetected for days or even weeks, and then you're looking at potentially late filing on reports, then you're looking at fines. Section 1 asks for the date of creation of your committee. This is the date the committee went over the $5,000 threshold in receipts or expenditures. Section 2 asks for the bank balance on the date of creation. In general, this figure cannot be greater than $5,000. Remember, a committee that is not over $5,000 has no filing obligations with us. The contribution or expenditure that took you over the threshold is the first one that must be reported. For example, let's say you received $4,800 in contributions and you had $4,000 worth of expenditures. Then you receive a $500 contribution. The day you deposit that $500 contribution is going to be your committee's creation date, because that's the day you went above the $5,000 threshold. Your funds available is going to be the $800 you had on hand, the $4,800 minus your $4,000, so you're at $800 for your amount of funds available as of your creation date. On Section 3, it asks if you are a new committee, a committee that is reactivating after previously filing or shutting down and filing a final report, or an existing committee filing an amendment. When amending the D1, you only need to fill out the committee name and address, mark box 3 that it's amendment, and then fill out any information that's changing beyond that point. Amendments must be reported within 10 days of any changes. Section 4 deals with the political committee designation. All Illinois political committees fall into one of 5 groups. We have candidate, political action, political party, ballot initiative, and independent expenditure committees. Taking a moment to talk about each of these types of committees. A candidate committee, as the name suggests, is one formed to support a specific candidate for elected office. The name of a candidate committee must identify the name of the candidate in its name. Only a candidate's name can be in a candidate political committee, so no other type of committee can have a candidate's name in it. A candidate can only establish one candidate committee for each office sought or held. If a candidate creates more than one committee, then each committee has to include the name of the office being sought, and if a candidate creates one committee to seek multiple offices in different elections, then the committee has to designate the election cycle that that candidate is going to be using for contribution limits. A political action committee is formed by any person or group other than a candidate or a party to support or oppose a candidate or candidates. The name of a political action committee has to include the name of the group or person that is responsible for its formation. However, if it's to support multiple candidates, it has to include the offices that the candidates are seeking and the jurisdiction that they're running in. A particular person or group can only establish or maintain one political action committee at a given time unless the other type of committee is an independent expenditure committee. A political party committee is formed by a state or county central committee of a party, a legislative caucus committee, or by a ward or township committeeman of a political party. The name of a political party committee must include the name of a political party that forms it. Each state, county, or ward or township group can only create one political party. A ballot initiative committee is one formed by a person or a group to support or oppose a question of public policy to be put on the ballot. The name of the ballot initiative committee has to include a brief description of the public policy question and whether the committee is supporting it or opposing it. Finally, an independent expenditure committee is formed for the exclusive purpose of making independent expenditures in support of or in opposition to a candidate, a public official, or a question of public policy to be submitted to the voters. All political committees, regardless of the types, file their disclosure reports with the State Board of Elections. Section 5.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Could I ask a quick question?
Go ahead.
Can you distinguish in layman kind of terms the difference between a political party committee, a political action committee? What's the difference?
Okay, a political action committee is basically set up to support candidates or a single candidate.
Okay.
It's formed by a group of different group of individuals. We can have unions doing it, you can have corporations doing it, but a political action committee is to support candidates. A political party committee is basically a group that has political affiliation. So you have to have a political status to have a political party committee. So you have to be like a ward committee or something like that to form a political party committee. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. In section 5, you will need to indicate the counties or districts in which the committee will be active, along with the political party affiliation, if applicable. If your committee has any sponsoring entities, you will need to list them here. A sponsoring entity is essentially any person or group that provides at least a third of your total funding for your committee in a quarter. However, once you file the D1 statement of organization, the first 30 days after that is exempt, and the sponsoring entity doesn't take effect until after that 30 days is over with. Section 6 requests a statement indicating the purpose of your creating your committee, for example, to support John Doe for public office. In Section 7, you will list any candidates the committee will support or oppose, along with full mailing address. You will also list the office he or she is running for and the party affiliation. If your committee is supporting multiple candidates, simply attach additional pages and list those additional candidates on additional pages, which can just be a sheet of paper or something like that. The committee's officers should be identified in Section 8. Remember, the same person may serve as both the chairman and the treasurer, but both positions must be filled. No transactions are allowed to occur while there is a vacancy in either position. We also ask for mailing addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses in which the officers can be contacted. Section 9 of the D1 asks for the name and address of any custodians of the books and accounts. If your committee employs an accounting firm or any other person besides the committee who prepares your reports, this is where you would list them. Section 10 is identifying the bank or financial institution or repository where your committee has funds, and if you have any investments, you would also list those here as well. Finally, Section 11 addresses what the committee will do. What the committee will do with funds left over once the committee has decided to close. Basically, you have three options. You can give it back to those who gave to you can give it back to a charitable organization, or you can give it to another political committee. When you fill out this section, you should indicate the names of such committees or charities that you're going to donate to. However, you can always amend that information later on if you end up deciding to go a different route. Once you have reviewed the information on the statement of organization for accuracy, and you basically sign the verification form at the very bottom. The treasurer or the candidate are the only two individuals that can sign off on the report. However, if it's a ballot initiative committee or an independent expenditure committee, the chairman needs to sign the report as well. Basically, next is the D1A supplement. The D1A supplement lists the members of the Senate or House of Representatives forming a committee if they form a political committee. This is basically just a caucus committee. So if we have a whole bunch of representatives getting together and they want to form a political action committee, this is what they would, political party committee, this is what they would do, and then they'd have to list the candidates in only, they can only be in one caucus committee. So each candidate can only be in one different caucus committee. All right. To file the statement of organization with the board, you can drop it off in person in either our Chicago or our Springfield office. You can fax it in, you can mail it in, or you can email it to d1@elections.il.gov. All of the filing options are at the very bottom of the form. Now, at this point in time, is there any questions on the statement of organization?
For the filing methods, is there a preferred method from your office's perspective, or is any of them fine?
Any of them are fine. Basically, what you just want to do is you want to get the report into us. You can fax it, email, whatever is going to be most convenient for you. Most of the reports now seem like we're getting a lot more email for the D1 statement of organization. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah. Does Illinois allow corporations to form PACs, or are they a sponsor for it, or how does that work?
All right. Political action committees. Corporations can form political action committees. That would be a group or associations or whatever. The corporations can set up a political action committee. They do have contribution limits as well, but corporations can set them up, and we do have quite a few.
So you still just have the people there, but then how do they indicate that they're associated with that?
Typically, it's the name of the political committee. You have like AT&T PAC or whatever the actual corporation is actually, whenever you're setting up the name of a political action committee, the organization that's setting it up has to be in the name of the political action committee or the person who's forming it. So if a corporation is forming it, their name should be identifiable in the actual name of the political action committee.
For 11 years, 11 years of my life, I worked at an association called the Illinois State Medical Society. And to answer your question, we had a PAC associated with that called IMPAC, the Illinois Medical Political Action Committee. And we sought contributions to a medical action. Yep. Thank you.
We've got another question over here, go ahead.
For all non-federal elections, do we basically deal only with the Illinois State Board of Elections and not the FEC?
Correct. I only deal with the local and state candidates. So if you're seeking one of those offices, then you would file with our office. If you're seeking a federal office, then you file with the Federal Election Commission. Any other questions at this point in time? All right. The next thing I'll talk about is the campaign disclosure calendar. This is our Bible, per se. This is when you have to file all your reports. You want to make sure you're filing all your reports timely. If you are a candidate political committee and you have delinquent reports and you are assessed civil penalties, you can face ballot forfeiture. What that means is if you have any outstanding civil penalties, when it's time to be certified on the ballot, you will not be certified on the ballot. You have to pay those civil penalties first. So when you're filing reports, make sure you are filing them on time. All right, once your committee is on file with us, you will periodically be required to file campaign disclosure reports. The board sends out notice to all the committees before these reports are due. However, with the budget crunch, the statute does provide that we only have to do it once per year. And the way the budget is looking at currently, we might have to go down that route. So we are recommending that you do sign up for email notifications. We do send out email notifications whenever the reports are due, just like when we send out our quarterly our packets for quarterly reports, so you can get email notifications. Hopefully they don't turn that off on us, at least for the internet. All right, moving on. Now we'll cover disclosure reports that your committee will be required to file and how to complete them. I will go over various schedules that will go with the D2. In addition, I will discuss the different kinds of reports and expenditures you will be reporting and how to report itemized and non-itemized entries. All political committees in Illinois are required to file 4 quarterly reports each year. Each quarterly report covers a 3-month period from January through March, April through June, July through September, and October through December. Each quarterly report is due on the 15th or the next business day of the following month. And again, that's identified on the campaign disclosure calendar. In the handouts that I did provide, I believe there's a couple still behind Larry, but that calendar identifies when all the reports are going to be due. It covers all of your committee's financial transactions during the 3-month period, and all of your committees, and all committees must file reports regardless if they had any activity during the period or not. A person can drop the form off in our Springfield or our Chicago office. They can mail in the reports, or they can file the reports electronically. Notice I didn't say fax. The statute does not provide that quarterly reports can be faxed in. If you are filing on paper, the report must be received by the board by the filing deadline or be postmarked more than 72 hours prior to the filing deadline. This is not like your taxes. You need to actually receive the report by the filing deadline. The form used to file quarterly reports is called a D2 of contributions and expenditures, and it contains 10 areas in 4 parts. They're divided into sections A, B, C, and D. However, before you can get to those sections, we will first need to fill out the topmost section of the D2 form. There are a number of check boxes to indicate the type of report you will be filing. Either quarterly report or final report, and in the case of a quarterly report, which quarter the report is going to be filed for, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th quarter. And whether the report is being filed is an amendment to an earlier report. You will also need to provide the name, address, and email address of the political committee. And if your committee address has changed since the last filing, please indicate that in the box as well. If you know your committee's identification number, you can enter that in the box to the right, but you don't have to worry about if If you don't know that number, we will, when we process all the schedules and the reports, we will insert that committee identification number. In the next section down, you will list your reporting period and also list the starting cash figure for the report. If this is your committee's first filing, the cash available figure should match the figure you identified on your D1 statement of organization as your funds available. If this is not your committee's first filing, the cash available figure should match the ending funds available from your committee's previous quarterly report. Section A, receipts, covers incoming money and in-kind contributions. Part 1 is for individual contributions. Anytime an individual contributes to the campaign, you must account for these donations in Part 1. This also holds true for donations from businesses, corporations, labor unions, associations, and other non-political groups. Part 2, transfers ins, refers to cash donations from other political organizations. If you have any questions on whether the organization is an established political committee, we recommend that your primary concern be to report it and just put it in Section 2. If you don't know if it's a political committee or not, just go ahead and put it under Section 2. In Part 3, loans received, your committee will disclose funds that have an expectation of repayment. The treasurer of your committee must maintain in writing the terms and conditions of all loans. Other receipts is the title given to Part 4. It covers cash receipts that didn't fit the prior 3 categories, such as interest on your committee savings account, return deposits or security deposits, and return checks or canceled checks. The line underneath Part 4, marked total receipts, asks for the sum of all incoming money reported during the period, so basically you're just doing some math. You're adding up sections 1 through 4, and that's your total receipts. The next section is in-kind contributions. The first 4 sections basically dealt with cash balance. The next section is in-kinds. In-kind contributions cover anything of value that the committee is given other than cash. They are generally goods and services provided free of charge or a reduced rate to your committee. For example, printing costs paid for by another entity, or office space provided to your campaign at a reduced rate or free of charge. These and other in-kind contributions are reported in Part 5. Any contributor that makes an in-kind contribution must certify its value to your committee within 5 days. I know this doesn't happen very often, but this is what's supposed to happen. Notification forms are available on our website, and you can also contact us and we can give them to you. But please remember, even if you don't receive this in-kind notification, you still need to report and account for the in-kind contributions on your reports. Once you find out about them, that is. Now moving on to the right side, the D2 cover sheet, to take a look at how you will report money spent by your committee. Section B, expenditures. Parts 6 through 9 will be used to report expenditures. Section 6, transfer out, is basically the opposite of Section 2, transfer ins. This time your committee is donating money to another political committee rather than receiving a donation. Section 7, loans made, does not come into play very often, but if you make a loan, so say if you loan money to another candidate, you would report that in Section 7, loans made. The vast majority of your expenditures incurred by your committee will be disclosed under Part 8, expenditures. All expenditures for running your campaign, from supplies, printing, and rent, to staff salaries and investments, will be disclosed in Part 8. In Part 9, you will list all independent expenditures made by your committee. If you add all entries in Parts 6 through 9, you will arrive at your figure that indicates your total expenditures made by your committee during that reporting period. As in the case with sections 1 through 4 receipts, your treasurer should be able to verify this figure by checking internal records of all your expenditures. Section C, debts and obligations, has only one part to it, Part 10. This is where you list all outstanding debts to your committee. This and investment total in the cash balance section are the only sections which information from one quarter report must be carried over to the next report. You will need to carry forward all outstanding debts until they are retired. Also, as you are filling out sections 1 through 10, if you have an area where there's no activity, just leave it blank. You don't have to put zeros in every single section. The lower right-hand corner of the D2 is home to Section D, cash balance. This is where you verify that your D2 total, your D2 report ending balance is consistent with your committee's account balance. Lines A through E essentially are reinforcing your grade school addition and subtraction. And this is basically just going plain and simple. A, B, C, and D, you're just adding up your lines, you're subtracting your lines, and that'll come down to your funds available to close the reporting period. Your funds available to close the reporting period should be reconcilable with your bank statement. So you do want to make sure whenever you are, before you file your report, that funds available to close the reporting period is reflecting your actual bank balance, or it should be reconcilable. When I say reconcilable, you might have a check that you wrote that hasn't cleared as of yet, so it might not actually be the exact same amount that's in your bank balance, but it should be reconcilable. If your committee has invested funds, you will need to indicate the value of the investment at the end of the reporting period on line F. No matter what kind of committee you are running, you will need to complete Section D, cash balance, on every quarterly report. Yes.
Could you show Section B for just a second?
Section B?
Well, it's coming up again. I saw it. Next slide.
Section D.
There, I
That's
see.
the whole-
That's fine.
Okay. Did you have any questions, or you just want to look at it?
Just want to look at
Okay. All right. Having looked at the D2, you have no doubt noticed each part of the form, 1 through 10, includes two different lines, one for itemized and one for not itemized. The top line, or the itemized line, is where you will list the sum of all itemized entries during the period. Any contributions or expenditures in the aggregate, that is the cumulative amount or total, of more than $150 from a single source during a reporting period must be disclosed and itemized. They must also be listed on schedules and schedules that are going to be that you will report, but I'll talk about those schedules in a minute. Any contributions or expenditures that do not exceed the $150 during a reporting period do not need to be itemized, and they will just be put on the non-itemized lines. These transactions are considered not itemized. The committee must provide a sum of all non-itemized transactions during the reporting period for each area. So basically you would go through and you would add up all your individual contributions for non-itemized contributions. So that would be all the contributions you received from individuals or businesses or corporations, non-for-profits, any of that money that came in, you would add all those up. If none of them gave you an aggregate of more than $150, and you lump that all together on line 1B for non-itemized individual contributions. Here's one important thing to keep in mind. If money in or money out totals more than $150 from a single source during the reporting period, it has to be itemized and it has to appear on a schedule. So if the same person gives you two $100 donations in the same period, that's $200 worth of itemized contributions. On the same token, if your committee pays the same company $100 for one purchase and $75 for another purchase, that's $175 worth of itemized expenditures. Because in aggregate, they went greater than $150, they need to show up on the actual schedules. The same holds true for in-kind contributions. Before we move on to the schedules, let's look at the date of receipt. For reporting purposes, it is very important to accurately list the date the contribution was deemed received. For cash contributions that are deposited, the date of receipt is the date the money is deposited into a bank, financial institution, or other repository of funds for the recipient committee. If the cash is not deposited, the date of receipt is the day the cash was given to an authorized member or official employee or agent of the committee. In the case a contribution is made by check or money order, the date of receipt is the day the money is either deposited or it's cashed. If the committee receives contributions through credit card or some other entity used for processing monetary contributions such as PayPal, the date of receipt is the date the committee receives notification that the contribution was deposited into their account. When dealing with in-kind contributions, where the committee does not actually obtain possessions of the goods or services, the date of receipt is the date the recipient committee receives notification of the in-kind contribution from the contributor. Again, in-kind contributions are you received something of monetary value, but you didn't receive cash. Again, contributors are required to provide that notification within 5 days of making the in-kind contribution. If no notice is received and the recipient committee does not actually obtain possessions of the goods or services, the date of receipt is considered to be the date the candidate, public official, or committee officers obtains knowledge of the in-kind contribution, including its value. If the contributed goods are actually received by the committee, the date of receipt, the goods are transferred, it's the date of the receipt, the goods are transferred to the possession of the committee. A contribution of services is considered to be made on the date the services are actually performed. Let's move on to the filling out the actual schedules. Anytime, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you could have a question and answer coming up quick soon or no?
I can go ahead.
What's the difference between expenditures and independent expenditures?
Okay. Expenditures are basically your everyday activity. Okay, so if you're going out and you're purchasing mailers, your yard signs, anything like that, your headquarters rent, that's just an expenditure. An independent expenditure is basically you went out and you purchased an election year communication or an express advocacy ad to support or oppose a candidate or a referendum, and they didn't know about it. You did this completely on your own. So there's no coordination in between what you're doing and what you actually put out with that other organization. So the candidate or the political committee or the ballot initiative committee has no knowledge of it whatsoever. That's an independent expenditure. Most committees don't actually have independent expenditures, at least the vast majority of them don't. The candidate committees don't typically have them. Independent expenditure committees do, like super PACs, that's what they basically go out and do. They are going out and they're doing independent expenditures. Understand your question?
Yes.
Any more at this point in time? All right. A Schedule A should be used for any itemized receipts reported in parts 1 through 4. This is a space at the top of the form. You will mark at the top of the form basically the different section that it's going to be for. So if it's individual contributions, you'll mark box 1 for individual contributions. Each receipt then should be listed using the name, full mailing address of the contributor, the deemed receipt date, the amount of receipt, and the aggregate amount received from the source during the reporting period. Notice that the boxes also provide an employer and occupation. So if an individual gives your committee an aggregate of more than $500 during the reporting period, the employer and occupation is required. So that needs to be, that's also for in-kind contributions as well. Committee must identify and report, or at least make a good faith effort whenever they receive a contribution of more than $500. So you have to at least make a good faith effort to try to obtain that employer and occupation. So the statute does provide, though, if you don't know that individual's information, you made a good faith effort, you can put in there good faith effort for the employer and occupation. But if we see a lot of those when we review the reports, we're going to contact you and ask you to go, let's work a little harder and try to get those employer and occupation, because the statute does require that. At the bottom of the schedule, this is not for just the Schedule A, but this is for all schedules. Basically, you would identify, you would number the pages. So if you have a whole bunch of schedules, contributions, you would report them on a Schedule A, then you just identify at the bottom of the page, like this page 1, page 2, page 3. And once you're done with the sections, for all of the itemizations on a schedule, over here you would list the total itemization for the total period. You would list that, and then you would put it on the D2 cover page. Did you have a question?
It was a follow-up on independent expenditures.
Okay.
Any Illinois laws that say, for instance, a person can work half time for the campaign and half time for his PAC?
What was that, I'm sorry?
What are the checks in there for independent expenditures? If you claim that you're independent.
The statute doesn't honestly have a lot of checks and balances on it. What you're kind of looking at is there can't be any coordination. So what happens is we'll receive a complaint on that typically, and then it'll go through the process of the complaint, and that's where we kind of determine if there was any coordination or not within the groups. Basically, we would have to close preliminary hearing. Basically, the complainant would have to present their case to the hearing officer. Then the hearing officer would make a recommendation. It would go in front of the board, and then the board would determine whether the complaint was filed on justifiable grounds or not, whether it should go to public hearing. If it goes to public hearing, that's where subpoenas can be issued, and that's where you're going to basically kind of find out where the actual coordination, if there was any or not, is once you kind of get to this public hearing status.
Okay.
All right. All right, moving on to the Schedule I for in-kind contributions. The Schedule I is for in-kind contributions that need to be itemized if anyone provides goods or services during the reporting period. On this schedule, list the contributor's name, full mailing address, the date the committee received the contribution, the value of each receipt, and the aggregate for the reporting period. The employer and occupation mandate holds true for individuals that give in-kind contributions. So if an individual gives you a $300 contribution and they give you a $300 in-kind contribution, in aggregate they gave you more than $500, their employer and occupation will need to be identified. Under vendor paid, list the business paid by the contributor if one was paid. So if the in-kind was from ABC Printing, then you wouldn't have a vendor. But if John Doe went out and purchased the in-kind contribution from ABC Printing, the vendor would be ABC Printing and John Doe would be the actual contributor. Under the description, simply disclose the nature of the in-kind contribution. On occasion, despite your best efforts, you may be unable to determine the value of an in-kind donation if the contributor doesn't give you an actual value for that. If that happens, make a good faith estimate on what the actual value of that is, and then just indicate in your description that this is an estimate. So, for example, estimated value of 4 used metal desks. You need some desks for the campaign office, someone had them, they gave them to you, just estimate the value. Schedule B. A Schedule B should be used to itemize expenditures by your committee of more than $150 to a single recipient during a reporting period. When you fill out the Schedule B, mark the box next to the appropriate type of expenditure you are disclosing. Each expenditure, list each expenditure by using the full name and mailing address of the recipient, the date of the expenditure, the purpose, the beneficiary, and amount, along with the aggregate amount for the recipient during the reporting period. One more thing to consider when itemizing expenditures, the actual recipient of the expenditure must be disclosed. So if a candidate pays $1,200 out of pocket for signs and then is reimbursed, you don't want to list that the candidate is being reimbursed on your campaign disclosure reports. You want to list the actual vendor that's being paid. This same holds true for credit card purchases. List the vendor from which the purchase was made, not Visa or MasterCard. So you want to list where you actually purchased them. You don't want to put on there that you paid Visa $3,000. I don't think anyone would be very happy if you want to look at your opponent's campaign disclosure reports and they just put Visa, $30,000. Well, that's not going to disclose where anything was spent. You need to break those down. All right. Going on to the B9. If your committee made itemized independent expenditures, you will list them on a Schedule B9. Enter the name and address information for where the expenditure was made, and also list the date, amount, and purpose of the independent expenditure. In addition, you must list the candidate, the office they are seeking, and whether the independent expenditure was to support or oppose that candidate. The B9 also requires an additional signature from the committee treasurer or candidate, certifying that the independent expenditure listed were not made in connection with the candidate or their committee. This goes back to your question earlier. They are certifying when they make those independent expenditures that they did not make these in coordination. So whether they do that or not is another question, but they are certifying when they file these B9s that they are not in coordination.
You were saying when somebody comes to look at it, the Visa card versus the, are these online or public?
All campaign disclosure reports are public records, and since right around 2010, into 2010, 2011, even if a committee files the reports on paper, we scan them and we put it up on our website as a PDF. If the committee files electronically, everything's available as soon as they file the report, or within a second or two. Because once they submit the report, it's posted to our website, and it's there for public viewing, and it's in a searchable database if the committees are filing electronically. So you can make all kinds of different searches and all different stuff like that.
Okay.
All right, campaign disclosure law lists a number of expenditures which are specifically prohibited. They are expenditures in violation of any law, clearly in excess of fair market value, to repay personal loans for personal residence. Yes, at one point in time, a committee, a long time ago, they bought a house. Guess what? We now have a law that prohibits you making payments on your personal residence. for clothing or personal laundry expenses, for personal travel, for membership or club dues for organizations primarily engaged in providing health, exercise, or recreational services. However, you can rent these facilities out for, say, a fundraiser. For anything for which a person has been reimbursed, for purchase of a motor vehicle unless it's used primarily, unless it's used for purchase of a motor vehicle used for non-committee related purposes, for tuition or other educational expenses, or for payments to anyone unless for compensation for services actually rendered. Office holders and candidates, however, are allowed to use campaign funds to offset the necessary and ordinary expenses associated with their governmental and public service functions. For instance, it is okay for a member of the General Assembly to use committee funds to operate a district office. Schedule C is for listing debts and obligations in existence at the end of a reporting period. This is the full name, the mailing address of each creditor, the date of debt was incurred, the original amount of debt, the cumulative payment to date, and the outstanding balance at the close of the reporting period. If your political committee invests campaign funds, you must report the transactions. I know most campaigns do not have investments, but there are some out there that actually do. Investment examples include any purchase of a stock, CD, mutual fund, or any other investment tool. All investment purchases should be reported on the D2 in Part 8 expenditures and itemized on a Schedule B. For any investments held by your political committee, you will also need to fill out an investment schedule. You will list a description of the investment and the date it was originally purchased and the purchase price, as well as the current value at the close of the reporting period. The total value of all investments which have been sold should be reported at the bottom of the investment schedule and again on Section D, line F of the D2. If your committee sells an investment during a quarter, you report the original value and the date of liquidation. Remember that the value at the time of liquidation should be reported on a Schedule A in Part 4 of the receipts. All investments must be liquidated before you can file a final report.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I don't know if this is related, but, or if you can answer this. Got like a checking account that grows interest?
Yes.
Would you include that on that report or something else?
Correct. You still have to account for, if you have interest on your savings account, you do have to account for that still. You would put it on Part 4 of the D2 in other receipts. Basically, your Part 4 is the catch-all. So if it doesn't fit in the first 3 sections of the D2, so if it's not an individual contribution, it's not a transfer in, and it's not a loan made, it's going to fall in Section 4, which is other receipts. So that's your interest on your bank account. If you have interest on a CD, that would be placed there. If you wrote a check and it wasn't cashed, you would bring the money back into other receipts. Speaking of a final report, it may be filed at any time by your committee, provided that the committee has decided to cease operating and its cash balance has reached $0. Remember that the committee may return any outstanding funds to contributors, donate to a charity, or transfer it to another political committee. The starting date for the final report will be January 1st, April 1st, July 1st, or October 1st, just like a quarterly report. And depending on the committee's, basically you're going to file the quarterly report, or the final report from your last quarter. So if you filed the first quarter of 2017 and then you want to finalize, you would pick it up from April 1st and then you would go through the day you close out the committee, and that would be your committee's last date of the reporting period. Again, when you file a final report, the cash balance at the end of the reporting period has to be at $0. Assets. Assets still in possession of your committee must be disposed of before you can file a final report. An asset may be defined as real estate, equipment such as like a computer, or if you purchase a printer or something like that, or if you purchased a motor vehicle exclusively for the use of the committee. The disposition of any asset of more than $150 must be disclosed on an asset schedule attached to the final report. Assets may either be sold or donated. If an asset is sold, both the recipient and the amount of the sale should be reported on a Schedule A in Part 4, Other Receipts. You only need to complete an asset schedule if you're filing a final report. Whether you are filing a quarter report or a final report, the candidate or the committee treasurer must sign the verification at the bottom of the report. If someone other than the committee treasurer submits the D2, their name has to be listed on the D2, whether it's a quarterly report or final report as well. Now I would like to see if anyone has any questions on the D2 itself or any of the schedules. I know kind of an answer, but...
I have a general question about the schedules. Are they required at any specific time? I've gone through the website a lot, and I haven't seen schedules that often, but I see the quarterlies. Are they supposed to be done at the same time, or is there specific times when schedules need to be that's not just quarterly?
Okay, when you file a report, you're filing a quarterly report, and then the itemization on that report is the actual schedules. So when you submit your quarterly report, that's when you're submitting your schedules as well, because the schedules are basically documenting all of your itemized transactions for that reporting period. So if you have a Schedule A, you have individual contributions on there, that's going to be reported with your quarterly report, because your quarterly report is just basically a summary of all your activity. Then you need to itemize those transactions that are an aggregate of more than $150, and those show up on the actual schedules, or if you're making expenditures, it'd be on like a Schedule B. All right? Go ahead.
More of a comment than a question. I don't know how many of you here have had to file these reports, but one thing that I've learned, your electronic reporting, what's it called?
IDIS.
IDIS. And that, I think that's a really tremendous tool. And one of the advantages, if you saw the schedules on there, you had to put the name and address and all that information. If you don't file electronically, you have to enter that vendor or contributor's name each quarter. But if you file electronically, you essentially create a database. If that same vendor were to come back and contribute again the next quarter, it can be called up, immediately, and you put the current quarter's amounts in there, and it will then file things as they need to be filed. And also, a compliment to the State Board of Elections office. The number of times that I've called down there, those folks are extremely knowledgeable, extremely helpful, and I think most of us who are doing those kind of things want things to get reported accurately, and that's the reciprocal help we get from the State Board of Elections. Here's how you can get this done to report things accurately. So, I would like to, thank the State Board of Elections for that role.
We try to do the best we can for helping people out. Electronic filing is actually the next thing I was going to go over. As you can see, electronic filing is next. But basically, yes, the electronic filing program, you're creating a database. So once you put in your transactions, after you put in those transactions, it will create the reports and the schedules for you. And there's notices in there when the reports actually need to be filed. So if you put a contribution of $1,000 or more into the system, it'll put at the very bottom of the screen, A1 due. If you make an independent expenditure, it'll tell you, B1 due. During the quarterly reporting time frame, once it's time to file the reports, it'll show up on the schedule and it'll say, quarterly report due. So the program is very useful because it does a lot of that bookkeeping for you. And like you said, the database is there, so if you have a whole bunch of contributors, same contributor or vendors on the expenditure side, they're all in the system. So once you enter into the database once, they're in there, all you have to do is start typing their name in again, and it'll pull them up in the system. Any other questions about the quarterly?
2 quick questions. First of all, it is okay to have a bank account that bears interest as long as you report it properly?
Correct. Yeah, at the very beginning, what I was talking about is...
Something about taxes?
Correct. You can have tax implications if you do have interest on your savings account. There are tax implications that you could have, so you have to file some reports with the IRS. But a lot of times, especially with the bank, the interest rates now, you're not going to get much with your interest rate. So,
your second question is, what are the restrictions on the recipient side, or who can contribute to it? Age requirements, residency, something like that?
Okay, there are no age requirement restrictions or anything, so anyone who's basically a U.S. citizen, they can give to your political committee. However, you can't accept money, it's the same on the federal level. If someone doesn't have a green card or something like that, you can't receive contributions for foreign nationals, but you can receive contributions from individuals, corporations, and there's no age restriction on that.
It's all permanent residents and citizens.
Correct.
So like an 11-year-old could give you $100.
Yes.
Does that also apply?
I would like to have his savings account or his allowance.
Does that also apply to corporations owned by foreign entities? How does that work exactly? Saudi Arabia owns a company in America and they donate to you.
If they're based out of America and they are registered, if their business is on file in America, they can make
So as long as they have an
contributions.
American corporate charter, they get.
Correct.
So you said for assets, those are like things we use. Does that include things that we have paid for?
Your assets, you only have to file an asset schedule when you submit a final report, but your assets are basically, if you have something that still has a value at the end of it, when you're ready to close out your committee, and it has value more than $150. So if you have yard signs, no one else is going to necessarily want to use your yard signs. So you're not going to have to fill out an asset schedule for that. Because your yard, unless your yard signs say, vote Democrat, or vote, I'm not even going to say anything else. But basically, your assets are, say, if some committees, they've purchased real estate. So they've actually purchased the building that they have their headquarters in. So they actually purchased that. So when they go to close out, they actually have to sell that. So that's when you'll be filling out your asset schedule. Or say if you can show cause that you purchased a political vehicle for the political committee because it's only going to be used for campaign purposes, and you can show cause that it's cheaper than to rent or lease a vehicle. You can't do that, and if you sell that, at the end, you can't keep the car. That's when you do your asset schedule. Okay?
Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? All right. Electronic filing. Any political committee which at any time during a reporting period has receipts or expenditures or their ending balance. So basically, any point in time, if you go above $10,000 during a reporting period, you're required to file your reports electronically. You can voluntarily file electronically prior to reaching that $10,000 threshold, but that is the requirement for filing electronically. The State Board of Elections provides software that is web-based. It's available on our website, which is www.elections.il.gov. The software is rather user-friendly. We've been working on it. If you've been involved with committees a while ago, IDIS version 1.0, oh, that was brutal. 1.1, another one that was brutal. IDIS 1.2, not so much very well user-friendly. Once we got into IDIS 2.0 and IDIS 3.0, once we actually started developing them ourselves in-house, that's when they started becoming a lot more user-friendly. Basically, to file electronically, you need to have a political committee on file with us, and you contact us, you call in, you give us a username and a password. We'll ask for the contact information for the organization, and we also ask for an email address. So some of you are already on file with us. If you haven't updated your email address with us recently, we now have in the actual program, if you forget what your password is, you can click on that and we will send a temporary password to your email address. So you might want to contact us again if you didn't originally give us an email address, or just to update that, or to actually give us one in the first place, because some people didn't give us an email address to start with. Basically, in the program, you enter all your financial information, and then the program creates the schedules for you and the actual reports. The user then uploads the reports. The system is basically a database. That is all it is. Until you actually go through and click on upload or file report, it's just going to sit in your database. So it's not available to the public. It's not actually filed until you click on file report. That's when the actual report is submitted to us. Training is available for the software in our Chicago office or our Springfield office. And we do have tutorials on it, and a lot of people just call in and we will walk you through the actual program. If you call us early in the reporting period, we have a lot more time to spend with you. We can sit down, if you call us now, and your report's not due until July 17th, we have plenty of time to sit down, if you're calling us now, to work through the reports with you, especially if you're first-time filers. We have plenty of time to sit down. I've sat down and I've talked and worked with the committee for an hour, 2 hours at a time. But if you're looking at the last day to file, our phones are rather busy. You're not going to get contacted back real quick, and we are kind of restricted on how much help we can actually give you. So procrastination is not your greatest friend when you're going to need assistance when it comes to electronic filing towards the end. We will do what we can to help you out, but try to file your reports early. And then another thing, the help menu is actually rather user-friendly. So in the actual program, staff wrote the help menu. Unfortunately, I was in the majority of that, writing a lot of that, but the help menu is very detailed, and you can find pretty much all the actual steps in there for actually going through all the different types of transactions that you need to be entered in the system. All right, the next thing I'm going to talk about is Schedule A1s and B1s. If you receive a contribution of $1,000 or more, you're required to file a Schedule A1. And if you make expenditures of $1,000 or more for independent expenditures, you're required to file a Schedule B1. Anytime your committee receives a contribution of $1,000 or more from a single source, business, committee, or other source, it has to be reported very quickly. This includes in-kind contributions, loans, and also contributions from the candidate to his or her own committee. This reporting is done using a report called a Schedule A1. At most times of the year, the Schedule A1 has to be filed within 5 business days. Unless it's within the 30-day window prior to the election, then it has to be filed within 2 business days. Basically, when you're looking at this, these can be very hefty fines if you don't file the reports in a timely manner. For a Schedule A1 violation, so anytime you have a contribution of $1,000 or more, if you don't report it timely, you can be assessed up to 50% of the actual contribution if you don't report it timely. So make sure, if you receive any contributions of $1,000 or more, you report it timely. The Schedule A1 form itself is rather simple. At the top, make sure you enter the committee's name and full mailing address. In the middle portion, you enter the date and amount of each contribution you are reporting, as well as the complete mailing address of the contributor. Finally, have the candidate or the treasurer sign and date the bottom of the form. Much like all other reports, if someone other than the chairman or treasurer submits the reports, their name should be listed on the form as well. It is important to note that when I talk about contributions of $1,000 or more, that means a single contribution of at least $1,000, not a collection of smaller contributions that add up to be more than $1,000 during the reporting period. So if you have someone who gives you a $900 contribution, and then the next day they give you a $500 contribution, there's no Schedule A1 requirement. It's only for contributions of $1,000 or more. There are several ways to submit a Schedule A1: in person at our Springfield or our Chicago office, by fax, or through electronic filing. Because of the short deadline involved, it is not recommended that you mail in the report. A mailed-in A1 actually has to be received by the board within the actual time frame that it's required to be filed in, so either 5 business days or within the 2 business days if it's within the 30-day window prior to the election. So it's not recommended that you mail in the form. If your committee is required to file its reports electronically, the Schedule A1 has to be filed electronically too. When it comes to figuring out what your reporting deadline is, remember that a Schedule A1 has to be filed within 2 business days if it's within the 30-day window prior to the election, or within 5 business days any other time of year. Go ahead.
This is kind of technical, but does the receipt of the donation count when you receive it from the individual or when you deposit it into your account?
All right, it depends on if you're depositing the contribution. It would start as your deemed receipt date would be your deposit date. If you receive cash and you don't deposit it, it would be the day that you end up basically receiving those funds. Okay, so it depends on when you actually receive the contribution. Is that clear? Okay. Weekends and holidays do not count, so in practical terms, you usually have a calendar week to file a Schedule A1 if it's for the 5 business days. So let's say you received a contribution, received a contribution, and you deposited it for $1,000 on a Thursday. Basically, you have 5 business days. So you look at, the first day would be the Friday. Saturday and Sundays don't count because weekends and holidays don't count. Then you're looking at Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So the 5th business day would be the following Thursday, so you have a calendar week to file a Schedule A1. If it falls within the 30-day window prior to the election, you only have 2 business days. So if you receive a contribution on that same Thursday, you would have to file the A1 on the following Monday. And an A1 is only required for contributions that are received by your committee. So basically, if you're making an expenditure, you don't have to file an A1. If you are giving a contribution to another political committee, the receiving committee has to file the A1. You don't have to file anything on your end, you just have to report it on your quarterly report. Now moving on to independent expenditures.
Real quick before you do, sorry. Let's say you've received that $1,000 contribution, but you have not yet met the $5,000 to file the D1.
Okay.
Once you receive the $1,000, do you have to then file both forms? Or just the A1, or how does that work?
Okay, for that example, you don't have any filing requirements with us until you reach that $5,000 threshold. Once you reach that $5,000 threshold, that's when you have to file as a political committee. And the contribution or expenditure that took you above the threshold is the first one you'd have to disclose by law. So if you received a $1,000 contribution prior to reaching your threshold, your $5,000 threshold, that's not going to have to be disclosed to us. It's the contribution or expenditure that takes you above the threshold is the first one that has to be disclosed to us. So in your example, you would not have to report that $1,000 contribution. Any other questions? Okay. Independent expenditures. Independent expenditures, again, are defined as any expenditure made for electioneering communications or to expressly advocate for or against the nomination or election of a clearly identified public official or candidate or question of public policy to be submitted to the voters, provided that the spending is not made in coordination in any way with the candidate or the committee. Just to be clear, if the candidate committee goes out and buys advertising for its own candidate, this is not an independent expenditure. Nor is it an independent expenditure if the committee makes a direct contribution to another candidate or committee. If the political committee makes independent expenditures totaling $1,000 or more, the expenditure must be reported on a report called a B1. This filing is due within 5 business days after making the independent expenditure, except that if the independent expenditure is made within the 60 days prior to the election, the B1 is due within 2 business days. A B1 has to be filed electronically, regardless if your committee is required to file their other reports electronically. So if you're filing a B1, it has to be filed electronically. And for calculating when the B1 must be filed, it's the same as the A1. All right, I've already gone over the Schedule B9, so I'm going to kind of skip over the Schedule B1. It contains all the same information that is on the B9. So instead of going over that again, it's basically all the information's there and the report needs to be filed electronically. Also, like the Schedule A1 reporting, independent expenditure reporting on a Schedule B1 will also have to be reported and included on your quarterly report for the period in which the expenditure was made. So anytime you have an independent expenditure, you file the B1, that on your next quarterly report, whenever that expenditure falls in, it'll have to be reported on the next quarterly report as well, and it'll be reported on the B9. If a natural person makes an aggregate of more than $3,000 in independent expenditures over a 12-month period to support or oppose a candidate or a public official, that person doesn't have to form a political committee, but does have to file a special disclosure with the board. The person then has to continue to report further spending in the same election in $1,000 increments until the election is over. Going back to the calendar again, as a reminder, the State Board of Elections campaign disclosure contains the filings for boards. Please remember that it is very important to timely file reports because your committee can face some hefty fines if it fails to file or delinquently files reports. Additionally, the campaign disclosure calendar identifies the committee. It identifies when the committee is required to file the Schedule A ones and the B ones in the shortened 2 business day timeframe. It may not be a bad idea just to report all your contributions of $1,000 or more and your independent expenditures of $1,000 or more within the 2 business days. That way you're always getting it filed timely. You do have the 5 business days if you're not within the 30-day window or the 60-day window prior to the election, but if you file it within 2, you're always making sure you're always on time. Backtracking a little bit to contribution limits. Contribution limits can be lifted in 2 different ways, either by self-funding or independent expenditures. A candidate, public official, or their immediate family members. Immediate family members are the spouse, the parent of the candidate, or the candidate's children. Can make unlimited contributions to the political committee or candidate political committee. However, a candidate is considered self-funding if during the 12 months prior to the election, the candidate or public official or their immediate family member contributes or loans or makes independent expenditures of more than $250,000 for statewide offices or $100,000 for all other elected offices on behalf of the candidate, public official, or their campaign. Once the threshold is passed, the board must be notified within 1 business day. And limits will be removed for the remainder of that election cycle for the candidate, for all candidates in that race. In cases of self-funding during a primary election cycle, the limit removal can extend through the following election cycle if the candidate who self-funded wins the primary election. Additionally, if an individual or an independent expenditure committee makes independent expenditures supporting or opposing a particular candidate during an election cycle that totals more than $250,000 for statewide offices or $100,000 for all other offices, the individual or independent expenditure committee must notify the State Board of Elections within 2 business days, and the limits will be removed for those candidates seeking that office for the remainder of the election cycle. I know I briefly mentioned all right, go ahead.
Are the limits, are they only removed for the candidate that is self-funding, or are they removed for everyone else?
For anyone who's seeking that office. So for example, Chris Kennedy not too long ago put $100,000 into the committee, his candidate committee for governor. So that means contribution limits are off for all candidates for governor. For all candidates that
From any entity or person?
Correct. There's no contribution limits currently for the governor's race.
Okay.
So once contribution limits are broken, it's basically a free game. You can receive as much as you can from any source.
So, question. I don't understand the broken part because they're restricted and then they're not restricted, but you made a contribution, so how is that restricted?
Okay, basically, there are contribution limits. So say like for a candidate, they can only receive $5,600 from an individual.
Right.
But say if you have a candidate that is semi-financially wealthy and they can contribute a whole bunch of money to the
So
political
they
committee.
break their own, like
They can,
their own, okay.
and actually, I'm sorry, Kennedy gave $250,000, not $100,000. It was $250,000 because it's for a statewide office, not for a local office. So I apologize on that. But basically, it's trying to, in theory, I believe, at least, it's trying to level the playing field. So if you have a millionaire for a candidate, other people can't compete with a millionaire. So then what you're looking at is contribution limits are lifted, so they have more opportunities to receive from other individuals to try to level the playing field.
Why isn't their individual contribution just limited to $5,600 to their individual contributing to their committee?
Because if they contribute, basically what you're looking at is contribution limits are lifted if they go above the candidate themselves, their parents, or their children. If any one of them give the committee above the contribution threshold for $250,000 for statewide office or $100,000 for any other office, if they give more than that, then contribution limits are broken. Then the handout I gave you for the contribution limits is no longer in effect for candidate political committees.
I guess my question is, why is it just not capped at $5,600? So why can't, Kennedy only contributed 5,600 to his own campaign, which is an entity of its own.
I understand what you're saying, but that's what the statute is, and our contribution limits, I believe, when they actually developed them, were kind of based off what the Federal Election Commission had, and we started at $5,000 and we've been adjusting and bumping it for inflation, but that's what the statute provides.
I think she's talking more along the lines of the political perspective, that we're catering to the rich and saying that now you have to try to get to their level through whatever means you have to get to their level, rather than say, you know, you need to play the same field as the average person. And I think that's what the argument she's bringing up, is that we should.
I understand the argument.
The argument
but-
for democracy is the latter.
Yeah, I understand the argument,
Have them
but I
stay at
can't
our
agree.
level,
Yeah.
and if they happen to have extra money, that's too bad. They can hold on to it and bank it.
If you don't reach that threshold, don't file the D1 statement of organization. So essentially, if you're not required to file, don't voluntarily get into the system, because then you have to continue filing reports until you submit the final report and take it down to a $0 balance. So if you never reach that $5,000 threshold, you only raise $300, you file that D1 statement of organization, you have to continue filing reports with us until you submit that final report and take the community balance down to $0. You want to carefully consider who you are going to select to be your campaign treasurer. Make sure you keep track of all receipts and expenditures, penny one, and make sure you keep records for 2 years, except for those for raffles, you want to keep your records for 3 years. The date of receipt of a monetary contribution is the date it is deposited. Make sure you report the end vendor and expenditures, not the person who is being reimbursed or the credit card company that was used to pay for the expense. Make sure all reports are filed timely, because no one likes paying fines, and they don't have a very good image associated with them either. And if you do have outstanding fines, like I said earlier, you can face ballot forfeiture, so you won't be certified on the ballot if you have outstanding civil penalties. For certain local smaller campaigns that are not likely to retain substantial funds, we recommend that you do file a final report and get out of the system, because you don't want to leave yourself susceptible to being assessed civil penalties. So if you're not going to have any more fundraisers, get out of the system, file that final report. Lastly, and most importantly, if you have any questions or concerns, at any point, please contact us. Anything, any questions you have. We don't want you to get in trouble. We want to help you stay out of trouble. Please contact us if you have any questions. Our Springfield office is open from 8 to 4:30, and our Chicago office is open from 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. I encourage you to contact our staff members for assistance and guidance whenever you have any questions, because we would much rather help you avoid hitting those potholes. But if you happen to hit one, sorry, it looks like that, well, then we're going to do what we can to help you get back on track. All right? Our contact information for our Springfield office is 217-782-4141, and our Chicago office is 312-814-6440. Any other questions that you have at this point in time? Basically, what you're looking at is make sure you're filing your reports on time, and if you have any questions, give us a call. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, at the top of that sheet, Charles Schultz is the guy who draws Snoopy.
Different
No,
spelling.
it's a different Charles.
Crazy, never heard that.
Any other questions? And if you don't feel comfortable asking a question in the group, you can always ask me afterwards or give us a call. All right, you're anything, no other questions?
All right, thank you. Quick couple announcements before I let you, because I'm sure they might want to talk a little bit afterwards. Mokina has a huge parade on the 4th of July. The Lincoln Way Democratic Organization is looking for people to walk with them, so if you're not doing anything on the 4th,
What time?
10 a.m. lineup.
10 a.m. step off, 9:30-ish lineup,
9:30-ish lineup at the main park. I think you're supposed to wear blue.
please.
Please. Or an American flaggy clothes if they want. Plainfield Township Dems are having a pig roast on July 15th. July 15th, it's a Saturday from 4 to 11. As I understand it, State Senator Daniel Biss will be there, Chris Kennedy will be there, Jennifer Bettino-Tarrant will be there, Natalie Manley will be there, Mike Kelly, the Will County Sheriff, will be there. They're going to be roasting a pig. Oh, Mark Ferry will be there, Bill Tolman, Rebecca Hosford, and several other high-profile politicians in the Plainfield area. So if you want to come, it's $35 in advance. I know Rebecca's got tickets, and I think Larry's got tickets. I imagine the gentleman in the back do as well. $40 at the door. Kids are $20. Bring your kids. There's going to be swimming, and there's going to be face painting, and they're going to have live music and trivia, dance contests, and all kinds of stuff. So it'll be great. And if you, I believe I would like to try to pitch to Daniel Biss that he do that torch juggling thing he had done in his most recent viral video. So we'll see what we can do to entertain the carnival goers at the pig roast. July 12th, it's a Wednesday. The Will County Democrats are meeting at 7 p.m. at the Knights of Columbus. So if you haven't gone to those, please go represent, this active community that's around them that wants to be involved. Next Friday is our members meeting. The second Friday, July 14th, we will have candidate for Governor J.B. Pritzker here. On the 21st, we will have candidate for Governor Chris Kennedy here. The end of the month, the 28th of July, we're going to have a civics refresher course. So this is, we'll pretend like you totally already know it, and we're just refreshing you. If you have any friends that probably maybe need to be taught it the first time, we'll just hide under the guise of refresher, and that works for everybody. We do have a fundraiser set up. Ours is August 9th. It's a Wednesday from 5:30 to 8:30. Do we have flyers for that?
Yes, we do.
Okay, cool. So hit up Susanna. She'll have information. I think it's $30 a person. And yes, there more details will be on the flyer. So if you guys have any other questions, talk to us. Like I said, if you're looking for avenues of action, talk to us. We'd like to find a way to get your feet on the pavement. So again, thank you, Andy, very much for being here. I appreciate it so much. And other than that, just keep an eye. We've got our updated calendar of the things coming up throughout the summer. And we have our first open date for people that want to come and join us is not till January 26th. So we're kind of busy on these Fridays. So if you know people that want to reach out and participate and come out and make presentations, please let them know as soon as possible so we can get them booked and out. Okay? Thanks, guys. Make sure to get something to eat. Make sure to throw a couple bucks in the jar.